When I asked Noelle to marry me last spring, I hadn't told her, or her son and daughter, that the auto repair shop where I worked as head mechanic was actually mine, all five of them. I told them I was just a long-time employee, a guy who'd been turning wrenches since before her kids were born. I thought I was being smart. Then, 3 weeks after she said yes, I came in on a Monday morning and found a stranger sitting at my desk with a briefcase full of documents telling me my services were no longer needed. Stay until the end and drop a comment letting me know which state you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. My name is Arthur Calloway. I'm 64 years old, and for most of my adult life, I've been two things at once: a mechanic who loves the work, and a businessman who learned the hard way to keep those two things separate. The shop where I started, Calloway Automotive, sits on the corner of Birchwood and Route 9 in Flansing, Michigan. My late wife Ellen and I opened it in 1998 with a small business loan, a used lift, and more optimism than sense. By the time she passed from ovarian cancer 6 years ago, we had 4 locations. I've since opened a 5th. I never stopped working the floor, not because I had to, because the day I stop hearing an engine and feeling something in my chest is the day I've lost the whole reason I started. Noelle walked into the original shop on a Thursday afternoon about 2 years ago. Her car was making a noise she described as kind of like a cat being stepped on slowly, which I respected for its accuracy. She was 57, recently divorced, and had just relocated from Columbus to Lansing to be closer to her daughter. She waited in the customer area while I diagnosed the problem myself. Worn CV axle, nothing serious, and when I came out to explain the repair, she asked questions most people don't ask. Practical questions. She wanted to understand what she was paying for. We talked for 20 minutes. I told her I'd been working at this shop most of my adult life. She told me about the divorce, about starting over in a city where she barely knew anyone, about her daughter Paige who had just had a baby. She said her ex-husband had been wealthy and had spent their entire marriage making sure she knew the money was his, not theirs. She said she wanted a simple life this time around. Honest people doing honest work. I believed her completely. She started bringing her car in for every oil change, every rotation. We had coffee twice before it became something more. She met my son, Trevor, who runs the back office operations for the shops, and she seemed to genuinely like him. She met a few of my longtime employees and they liked her too. For 18 months I was happier than I'd been since Ellen died. I told Noelle I made good mechanics' wages, which is true. I pay myself an hourly rate as floor supervisor across all 5 shops, logged through payroll like any other employee. I didn't mention the LLC. I didn't mention the commercial real estate I own on 3 of the 5 properties, or that my overall net worth is somewhere in the neighborhood of $3.5 million. After Ellen died, I dated twice, briefly, and both times the moment I mentioned owning the business, the energy in the room shifted in a way I still can't quite describe. Something behind the eyes. I swore I wouldn't let that happen again. So I kept quiet, and I watched. And for 18 months, everything Noelle showed me seemed real. The engagement party was at my buddy Ray's lake house outside of DeWitt. Nothing fancy. 30 people, pulled pork, cold beer, and a bonfire. Noelle wore a yellow dress and laughed all night. Her daughter Paige gave a toast that made half the room tear up. Her son Brendan shook my hand and said genuinely it seemed, "We're glad she found you, Arthur." I remember standing by the fire that night thinking, this is what the second half looks like. I can live with this. I was at the shop by 6 the next Monday morning, same as always. I like the early hours before the other guys come in. Coffee, inventory check, walking the floor alone. When I unlocked the side entrance, I noticed the light in the office was already on. I thought one of my managers had come in early. The man sitting at my desk was someone I'd never seen before. Late 40s, expensive haircut, a blazer that didn't belong anywhere near a garage. Beside him sat Noelle, her posture rigid, and Brendan, who couldn't seem to find anywhere to put his eyes. "Arthur," Noelle said, "close the door." I've been in enough difficult conversations in my life to know when someone has rehearsed what they're about to say. Everything about her posture told me she'd been sitting with these words for a while. "We need to talk about your position here." I almost laughed. My position. I've been speaking with a business consultant. His name is Douglas Hale. She gestured toward the man in my chair. He's helped us structure an acquisition of this location. Douglas Hale stood, offered his hand. I didn't take it. Mr. Calloway, I represent a group of investors looking to modernize independent automotive businesses in the Midwest. Miss Noel approached us 4 weeks ago about this particular property. We've worked with the ownership entity, a holding company listed as CAG Properties, and formalized a management transition agreement. As of Friday, she holds the operational lease on this location. I heard every word. I understood every word, and I still needed him to say it again, slowly, because some part of my brain refused to process it. She holds the lease, I repeated. That's correct, which gives her authority over staffing and operational decisions. She's asked me to inform you that your employment as floor supervisor is being terminated, effective today. 2-week severance will be processed. I looked at Brendan. He looked at his shoes. Brendan, I said, you knew about this. It's a business decision, Arthur. His voice was flat, practiced. Mom needs something of her own. Something stable. You've been here 20 years. You can find something else. Noelle's face had closed off in a way I hadn't seen before. The warmth I'd come to rely on was simply gone, replaced by something careful and cool. You're a good mechanic, Arthur, but you're not going anywhere. You never were. I need to build something that lasts, and I can't do that watching you turn wrenches until you're 70. Brendan has a business degree. He should be running an operation, not watching his mother's fiancée torque lug nuts. I looked at the ring on her left hand, the one I'd bought, and the engagement. She slid it off and set it on the desk between us. I think we both need to step back. I picked up the termination letter. I picked up the lease agreement. I said, fine, and I walked out of my own shop. I drove to Trevor's house. He was still in his bathrobe drinking coffee on the porch when I pulled up. And when I told him what happened, he sat very still for a long moment. Dad, he said, she signed a lease with CAG Properties? That's what Hale said. Dad, CAG Properties is us. It's your LLC. You're the only authorized signatory. He set his mug down. Whatever they signed, it's not real. I had already started to suspect as much during the drive over, but hearing Trevor say it out loud made something settle in my chest. Not relief exactly, something colder than that. Call Reeves, I said. Martin Reeves had been my business attorney since 2003. Tell him we need him this morning. Already dialing. I spent the next 4 hours in Martin's conference room going through every document Noel and Douglas Hale had provided. The lease agreement used our LLC name correctly, had our registered address, and referenced the actual property. But the signature on behalf of CAG Properties was a forgery. The name used was a former officer of the company who had resigned in 2019. The notary seal was from a notary in Detroit whose license had been suspended 2 years ago. The entire document was a fabrication and not a particularly careful one. Douglas Hale, Martin told me after 2 phone calls, did not appear in any legitimate business registry in Michigan. His consultant credentials were listed on a professionally designed website that had been registered 11 weeks ago. The business address on his card was a UPS store on Saginaw Highway. Martin looked at me across the table. Arthur, someone put this together fast and cheap. It would fool a layperson who wasn't asking questions. It wouldn't survive 30 seconds of real scrutiny. She paid him something, I said. Almost certainly. The question is how much, and whether she knew the documents were forged, or whether she was being worked by Hale as much as she was working you. That question stayed with me all day. My phone buzzed around noon. It was a text from Paige, Noel's daughter, the one who had given the toast at the bonfire. It said only, "Can we meet?" Not at the shop. Don't tell my mom. We met at a Panera 2 miles from her house. She looked like she hadn't slept. She had her baby in a carrier and kept bouncing slightly even when the baby wasn't fussing, that automatic habit new mothers develop. I didn't know about the restaurant, she said, then corrected herself. The shop. I didn't know about the shop plan until 2 days ago. Brendan told me because he was excited about managing it. He said Mom had found an investor, a consultant, who was setting everything up. Douglas Hale. She called him Doug. She met him at some small business seminar about 6 weeks ago. He told her he specialized in helping people acquire underperforming businesses, that the automotive shop where you worked was an opportunity, that the ownership was a passive holding company that would be easy to approach, that she could take over the lease and flip the operation within 2 years for a significant profit. How much did she give him? Paige hesitated. I think $45,000. She told me it was for legal fees, licensing, and first-year operating costs. She used most of what was left from her divorce settlement. I thought about that. Noelle had told me she'd walked away from the divorce with almost nothing, a few thousand in savings, her car, some furniture. But I had done my own quiet research after she and Brendan had walked me out of my own shop that morning. The divorce from her ex-husband was a matter of public record in Franklin County, Ohio. She had received a cash settlement of $420,000, retained a joint investment account worth roughly $60,000, and kept her half of a Columbus condo that had sold 8 months ago for just under $300,000. She had not walked away with nothing. She had walked away with the better part of $500,000 and chosen, for reasons I couldn't fully explain, to present herself to me as a woman barely scraping by. Paige, I said, I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm. She looked at me. I'm not the floor supervisor at Callaway Automotive. I'm the owner. I've owned it since 1998. All 5 locations. The holding company Hale told your mother he was negotiating with. That's my LLC. I'm the only person who could authorize a lease transfer on that property, and I didn't authorize anything. Whatever Hale gave your mother is worthless paper. She stared at me for a long moment. The baby made a small sound and she bounced automatically. You own it, she said. Yes. Why didn't you tell her? I explained. The 2 women before Noelle, the way money changed things. The way I'd wanted to know she was with me because of who I was, not what I had. Paige listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she looked out the window for a while. She wasn't struggling, I said quietly. I found her divorce records this morning. She has close to $500,000 in assets. Paige closed her eyes. I know. I've known for a while. I didn't know she was hiding it from you specifically, but I knew she wasn't broke. She opened her eyes. She told Brendan the plan was to get the lease, flip the business, and use the profit to set up a fund for him to launch a franchise. She told him you were just an employee who'd move on. And you didn't tell me. I found out 2 days ago, Arthur, and I'm telling you now. Her voice broke slightly. I'm sorry. I know that's not enough, but I am. I didn't say anything for a moment. I believed her. The guilt on her face was too specific to be performance. Is there anything else? I asked. Anything about Hale that seemed off to you? She bit her lip and pulled out her phone. Actually, yes. I looked him up after Brendan told me. His website looks professional, but there's nothing about him anywhere else. No LinkedIn, no press mentions, no reviews. I called the number on his site, and it went to a voicemail that was already full. She showed me her screen, and I found this. It was a court record from Wayne County, a civil suit from 3 years ago, a woman who had paid $60,000 to a business consultant operating under a different name who had promised to help her acquire a laundromat in Dearborn. The case had been settled out of court. The consultant's description matched Douglas Hale closely enough that I didn't need to read further. This was his pattern. He found women, usually recently divorced, usually sitting on settlement money, usually newly ambitious in the way that people become when they've spent years subordinating their own plans to someone else's life, and he offered them a shortcut. He built just enough of a paper structure to feel legitimate, collected his fee, and moved on before anyone looked closely. Paige, I said, your mother needs to see this, and she needs to call the police before Hale disappears with her money. I tried to show her last night. She said I was jealous of her success, that I'd always tried to slow her down. I nodded slowly. Then let's give her one more chance to hear it directly. The next morning I drove to the shop. There was a handwritten sign in the window. Under new management. Now accepting new clients. Brendan had parked his car in my spot. Inside, things were not going well. One of my longtime guys, a mechanic named Curtis who'd been with me for 11 years, was standing in the bay with his arms crossed, talking to Noelle in a way that did not suggest enthusiasm for the new arrangement. The other 2 guys on shift were working but slowly, the way people work when they're deciding whether to quit. Brendan was in the office. He'd rearranged my desk. Noelle saw me and moved immediately to intercept. "You need to leave. You don't work here." "I know," I said. "I came to talk." "There's nothing to talk about. Douglas Hale isn't who he told you he was." Something moved across her face. Not quite doubt, not quite certainty. "You're saying that because you're angry." "I'm saying it because it's true." I kept my voice level. "His name probably isn't Douglas Hale. He's run this same scheme at least once before that I can document, and likely more times that I can't. The lease agreement he gave you is forged. He used a name that hasn't been authorized to sign for my LLC in 5 years. The notary seal is from a suspended license." I paused. "He took your money and gave you paper that isn't worth anything." Noelle's jaw tightened. "That's not possible. I watched him negotiate. I was on the calls." "You watched a performance, Noelle. He's good at it. That's what he does." Brendan had come out of the office and was standing behind his mother. I could see him recalculating, the way young men do when the story they've been told starts to show gaps. "Mom," he said quietly, "maybe we should." "Don't." Her voice was sharp. I laid the printed documents on the hood of the nearest car. Martin's analysis. The Wayne County court record page had found Hale's website registration showing it was created 11 weeks ago, the signature comparison between the forged lease and the actual CAG Properties corporate documents. She didn't move toward them. But she didn't tell me to leave again either. "Call your bank," I said. "Right now. Check the account where you sent the $45,000. See if you can still initiate a recall." A long silence. Curtis, across the shop, pretended not to be listening. Brendan was looking at the documents now. Noelle picked up her phone. It took 7 minutes for the bank to confirm what I already suspected. Douglas Hale had moved the money within 24 hours of receiving it, routed through 2 transfers to an account in a different name. The recall request would be filed, but the representative on the phone did not sound optimistic. The color had drained completely from Noelle's face by the time she hung up. "He's gone," she said. "Yes." "I gave him $45,000. "Yes." She sat down on a waiting room chair, the same chairs I'd replaced 2 years ago, the ones she'd sat in the first day I ever talked to her. She put her face in her hands and didn't say anything for a while. Brendan sat beside her. His confidence had gone out of him like air from a tire. I called the Lansing Police Department. The detective who took the initial report, a woman named Detective Okafor, recognized Hale's description almost immediately. She said they'd had 2 complaints involving a similar operator in the past 18 months. Both automotive-adjacent businesses, both female victims in their late 50s, both presenting with near-identical fraudulent lease paperwork. "We'll put out a bolo," she told me. "He's probably not still in Michigan, but we'll work it." While we waited for the officers to arrive, I sat across from Noelle in the waiting room. Brendan had stepped outside. It was just us for the first time that morning. "How long have you known?" she asked. "About owning it?" "Since 1998. "No. I mean, how long have you known that I knew about the lease plan?" "Before today." "Since yesterday morning," I said, "when you handed me the termination letter." She nodded. "You could have shut this down immediately. Called the police before I even opened this morning." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. "Because I wanted you to have a chance to see it yourself. And because Brendan needed to see it too. And because—" I stopped. "Because for 18 months I thought I knew you. And I wanted to be wrong about this morning." Her throat moved. "I wasn't who you thought I was." "No. The divorce settlement, the condo, you found all of it." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "I spent 22 years watching my ex-husband control everything with money. The accounts, the decisions, what we did and where we went and whether I was allowed to feel secure. When I left, I told myself I was going to build something that was mine, that nobody could take." She looked at the floor. "I don't think that explains what I did. I just want you to understand that it wasn't nothing." "I understand that," I said. "It doesn't change what you tried to do." "No," she agreed, "it doesn't. Detective Okafor arrived with a colleague 20 minutes later. They took statements from all of us, Noel, Brendan, me, and Curtis, who turned out to have a very clear recollection of Hale's 2 visits to the shop and what he'd said during them. The forged lease agreement was taken into evidence. Detective Okafor told Noel the recovery odds on the money were low, but not zero, if they located Hale quickly enough and the funds hadn't been fully dispersed. Civil recovery was possible. Before Noel left, she turned to me one more time. "Are you going to press charges against me?" I'd thought about this too. Martin had told me that charging her would be difficult. There was no evidence she knew the documents were forged, and her participation, however calculated, was largely that of a victim who had tried to become a perpetrator using a weapon that turned out to be fake. The harm to me had been minimal in practical terms. The harm to her had been $45,000 and her dignity. "No," I said. She nodded once. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just be honest with the next person." Brennan shook my hand on the way out. He looked younger than he had 3 days ago, when he'd stood in my office telling me it was just business. "I'm sorry, Arthur," he said. "I genuinely am." "I know," I said. "Learn from it." The shop was quiet after they left. Curtis went back to the bay. The other guys followed. By noon, we were running normally. The calendar full. The lift busy. The coffee pot going. As if the morning had been a bad dream that dissolved once you moved around in it. Paige texted me at 2 in the afternoon. She called me. She told me what happened. "Thank you for not making it worse than it had to be." Then, after a pause, "I know you probably don't want to hear from any of us for a while. I understand. But I hope someday that changes." I typed back, "Take care of that baby." Then I put my phone in my pocket and went back to work. 2 months later, Detective Okafor called to tell me they'd arrested a man named Kevin Doyle at a bus station in Gary, Indiana. He had a Michigan driver's license in the name Douglas Hale, a Georgia license in another name, and $11,000 in cash. He also had documentation for 4 active schemes in 3 states, none of which had yet progressed to the point of the victims losing money. They recovered $31,000 of Noel's $45,000. It wasn't everything. But it wasn't nothing either. Trevor and I went to dinner to celebrate. We sat at the same bar Ellen and I used to go to after big weeks, and Trevor ordered the same thing his mother used to order, a blue moon with an orange slice, without seeming to realize it. I didn't say anything. I just sat there watching my son enjoy his beer and thought about what it means to build something that lasts. You build it slow. You build it honest. You protect it not by hiding it, but by knowing it well enough that no fake document can misrepresent it. 6 weeks after that, I was locking up the shop on a Friday evening when my neighbor Margaret, she lives 3 houses down and has been bringing my guys baked goods since Ellen died, stopped by to return a set of socket wrenches her son had borrowed. She brought her sister with her. The sister's name was Donna. She was 61, a retired middle school principal from Ann Arbor, recently widowed, with a sense of humor that showed up before she finished introducing herself. She looked at the shop sign, then at me. "Callaway Automotive," she said. "Are you the Callaway?" "I am," I said, and for the first time in 2 years I said the next part without hesitating. "I own the place. 5 locations, actually. Started it with my late wife a long time ago." She raised her eyebrows, not in the way I'd feared, not calculating, just surprised. "That's a real thing you built," she said. "It is," I agreed. "You want to see the shop?" She did. We walked through the bays in the low evening light while I explained what each piece of equipment does. She asked real questions, the kind that come from genuine curiosity rather than polite performance. She'd spent 30 years managing a school building and understood operational systems better than most people I'd tried to explain it to. We were in the parking lot saying goodbye when she said, "Margaret tells me you make a mean breakfast." "I do." "Prove it sometime." I smiled. "Sometime soon." Trevor called that night to check in, the way he does on Fridays. I told him about Donna. He was quiet for a moment. "Did you tell her?" he asked. "About the shops?" "First thing." Another pause. Then, "Good, Dad." I sat on the porch after we hung up. Same porch where Ellen and I used to drink coffee on Sunday mornings before heading to the original shop. The evening was warm, and Michigan was doing that thing it does in late summer, where everything goes still and golden, and you can hear the whole neighborhood at once. A lawnmower, 3 streets over, kids somewhere, somebody's radio. Ellen would have liked Donna, I think. She was always better than me at knowing, quickly, who the real ones were. I was slower at it. I needed to learn the hard way that keeping secrets to protect yourself can become its own kind of lie, and that the right person won't need the secret kept from them in the first place. Noelle had taught me that. I was grateful for it, in the crooked way you're sometimes grateful for painful things. The shop would open again at 7 tomorrow morning. Curtis would be first in. The coffee would be bad until I fixed it, same as always. Some things don't need to change. I keep coming back to one moment, not the morning Noelle handed me the termination letter, and not the afternoon she sat in that waiting room chair with her face in her hands. I keep coming back to the bonfire at Ray's Lake House, the night of the engagement party, when I stood watching the fire and thought, this is what the second half looks like. I was right. I just didn't know yet what kind of second half it was going to be. There's a thing that happens when you build something over a long period of time. A business, a marriage, a life, where you start to believe that the work itself is the protection. That if you just show up every day and do the job right, the structure holds. I believed that for a long time. What I didn't reckon with is that the same discipline that builds something can also blind you to what's happening right next to you. I saw what I wanted to see in Noelle because I was tired of being alone, and she was good at being what tired people want to see. That's not stupidity. That's just being human. But there's a cost to it. What saved me wasn't luck, and it wasn't rage. It was the same thing that built the shops in the first place. I knew my own paperwork. I'd spent 26 years understanding every document, every LLC filing, every lease structure, every signature authorization. When Douglas Hale sat in my chair and told me what he'd arranged, I knew within 60 seconds that it wasn't real, because I knew exactly what real looked like. There's no substitute for that. You can't fake your way to knowing your own business. You either do the work of understanding it or you don't. And when the moment comes, that gap shows. Noelle hadn't done that work. She'd handed $45,000 to a man whose credentials she never verified, whose website was 11 weeks old, whose phone went to a full voicemail. She was smart enough to plan something complicated and not careful enough to check whether the foundation was solid. That gap cost her almost everything she gave him. I think about Brendan, too. He's not a bad kid. He wanted a shortcut to something real, and his mother offered him one, and he took it without asking enough questions. That's a lesson most people learn eventually. That shortcuts borrowed from someone else's scheme usually end the same way the scheme does. The only things worth having are the ones you actually earned your way into. And Paige, she's the one I think about most charitably. She found out late, told me immediately, and chose honesty over loyalty to a plan she hadn't signed up for. That took something. It's easy to do the right thing when it costs you nothing. She did it knowing it might cost her relationship with her mother. That kind of character doesn't come from nowhere. You build it the same way you build anything else, one small decision at a time. I'm not the same man I was. The morning I walked out of my own shop carrying a termination letter. Something shook loose that day that I think needed to shake loose. I'd been carrying a secret for 18 months that I told myself was self-protection, and it was, but it was also a way of avoiding the harder question of whether I actually trusted the person I was planning to marry. Real trust means showing someone who you are and watching what they do with it. I skipped that step and I paid for it in a different kind of way. I don't regret being careful. I regret not being honest sooner. There's a difference. When Donna asked me, standing in the parking lot on a Friday evening, whether I was the Callaway on the sign, I told her the truth before she finished asking. All of it. The shops, the history, Ellen, everything. And she looked at it the way you look at something that took a long time to build and said, "That's a real thing. That's enough. That's exactly enough."